Stephen, now you can start recording.
Pallavi, it says you have to give me permission to.
Okay, is anyone else able to record? Leah or Mai, do you see the record button? Stephen, now you can start recording.
Let me see in here.
Pallavi, I'm able to record it, but just a reminder, I do have to leave, so it wouldn't be the full duration of it.
Katie, are you able to do it on your end? You're muted.
It already says it's recording.
Right.
Yeah, but
I would have
just
to
to give a second, just to have a second copy in case. Okay.
No, I need permission from the host.
Okay, that's okay. I'm recording. So let's just start. Okay, so we are all set. Hello to everyone who has joined us and welcome to our webinar titled Techno-Narratives with Katie Graham and Joy Sen. This is going to be a wonderful conversation around the idea of the nature of the real and the virtual in today's digital world. So we are very much looking forward to it. Welcome all to this webinar. The student organizing committee is here with me as well. Stephen Napoli, Leah Simpson, and Mai Nguyen. We will begin our webinar, which is in the format of a conversation, but we will have 20-minute presentations from each of our speakers. Then we will have a conversation amongst the two, followed by a question-answer session. This webinar series is organized by the Canadian Centre for Mindful Habitats in association with the Bachelor of Interior Design program, Algonquin College. And we have a set of 8 webinars that we are going through. Let's begin with this session with Katie. And I will ask Leah to come in and introduce. In the meantime, if anyone in the audience has any question, please feel free to put it in the chat window. Our YouTube viewers, you can put it in the chat window as well, and we will bring in your questions here into the webinar. So I'll hand it over to Leah to introduce our first speaker today. That is Katie.
Good morning or good evening from wherever you are joining us today. We are pleased to be joined today by both Dr. Joy Sen and Katie Graham. Katie Graham is currently part of the faculty of the Bachelor of Media Production and Design in the School of Journalism and Communications at Carleton University in Ottawa. Prior to this appointment, she was actively involved for a decade with Carleton Immersive Media Studio, CIMS abbreviated, a research lab focused on how advanced digital technologies and hybrid forms of representation can reveal the invisible aspects of architecture. While at CIMS, she led multiple digitally assisted storytelling projects that use CIMS digital assets, such as panoramas, models, and point cloud data to create public outreach projects for the web, mobile, and virtual reality. Projects include the Canadian Senate Virtual Tour, the VR kiosk, and Parliament, a virtual experience. Katie is currently involved with CIMS as associate faculty. Katie Graham received her Bachelor of Science in 2008 and her Master's of Architecture in 2010 at the Israeli School of Architecture and Urbanism at Carleton University. She is currently completing her PhD in architecture with a focus on virtual reality and storytelling. Thank you, Katie, for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. I'll just start sharing my screen. Give me a second. Okay, so thank you very much for that introduction. I don't think I need to say any more. I'm excited to be here today, and today I'm talking about some projects, specifically one project that I've done at Carleton Immersive Media Studio. So I wanted to start by actually first telling you the story of Parliament Hill and the Parliament buildings. And this actually begins a long time ago in the 1800s, before Canada was a country, when when the land that was Parliament Hill was actually called Barracks Hill. And it was a military base that was created in order to help with Bytown, as well as the building of the Rideau Canal. And then shortly after that, in 1867, Canada became a country and Ottawa was named the capital. And because of that, new Parliament buildings had to be built, and they chose the land of Parliament Hill. So there's 3 buildings, the East Block, the West Block, and the Center Block, that were built in a Gothic Revival style. But then in 1916, a fire broke out in the Center Block, and the Center Block burnt down, except for the libraries that luckily were able to close their doors and protect that portion of the building. And this fire burnt everything to the ground, and they had to rebuild. And so they started to rebuild, and they rebuilt the whole building in a new style, and it included this large peace tower that was kind of a center point of the building. And then in 1967, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Canada, or birthday of Canada, the Centennial Flame was built on Parliament grounds. And since then, Parliament has been a place of lots of activity and tours. People come to visit Parliament Hill and see the activities within it. You can have these tours of the building where you get to learn about Canadian democracy, as well as the importance of the building itself. But recently, the building is closed, and it's closed because of the multi-year rehabilitation project that's underway. And so no longer do you have access to this building to learn about the importance of the building and Canada and democracy. And that's kind of where the challenge becomes of what do we do now? And that's actually where several of the projects that I've worked on at Carleton Immersive Media Studio come in. So SIMS has been involved in this rehabilitation project for quite a while in various ways, including the documentation through point cloud and photogrammetry of the grounds and the buildings, as well as creating building information models of the buildings as well. So we have lots of different data and have helped both before for the documentation and now with alongside with the architecture for the modeling. And because of this, we had all of these assets and we knew the building very well. So it became a logical choice for us to be involved in telling this story of the rehabilitation project. And we've done it through many ways. And 4 of these projects, I'll just briefly mention. The VR kiosk was a walk-up VR bar that was across the street from Parliament Hill in 2017, where you could experience different 360 videos that were about 2 minutes long that expressed the different stories of the Parliament buildings and the rehabilitation project. And each one of these we created using layering of the building information model, like renders from it, panoramic photos, renders of the point cloud data, as well as historic photos and models that we had of other buildings and areas. Then Building Canada's Parliament was a prototype project that was for a website that never made it to the finish line, but it used the idea of interactive media to really tell this story as well. And the idea was that there'd be small little stories that would be released weekly, focusing on different aspects of the rehabilitation project and the significance of the architecture and artifacts and artwork of the building. One such project is this relocation of the House of Commons from the Center Block to the West Block during the rehabilitation project. And you can see how the interactive elements within the experience would make it an engaging way to learn about the importance. And next is the Senate virtual tour, which is a 360 tour of all of the spaces related to the Senate, where you can move around to the different spots and really just get to experience the spaces that are related to the Senate. And included in it are these little hotspots that you can click on to learn more information. These hotspots focus on artwork and the architecture and the furniture of the space, and the text and audio description of it, but then also have photographs and the model that has little animations for it. And last is the Parliament of Virtual Experience. And this is a project that was just released on Steam back in May. And it was a project that we were involved in with a large group, specifically the National Film Board and the Library of Parliament were the creators. And we were helped develop the model of the scene. And so this is taking you through the different spaces that you would normally see in a physical tour and teaching you about kind of democracy and the role that the building plays within it. And for this experience, what our role was, where we were in some ways we can say we were the set designers. We created the model that the story was contained in. And this is actually the project that I'm going to be focusing the majority of the rest of my lecture, my presentation on. So what do all of these stories have in common? Well, they're the same story. They are all talking about the Parliament buildings and that story specifically, and the rehabilitation project and why it's important for us to know about this building. But they've all done it in different ways. They've used their own tools and techniques to convey that story and have done it very differently. And that's kind of the important thing to kind of think of here, is that because these are in different mediums, from like 360 videos to interactive design, and to like more of a VR experience, they all have a different way that they can communicate and express that story. And this is where the difference between the story and the discourse of the story come in. And to understand this a little bit more, I'm going to mention The Wizard of Oz. So The Wizard of Oz, I'm sure most people here have seen it. You know, Dorothy, tornado, her house moves and lands in this magical world. And up until that very moment when she opens the door and like enters this new world that she's in, it's all in monochromatic. There's no color whatsoever. But as soon as she opens that door, there's bright colors. Her dress transforms to blue. There's the yellow brick road. There's the green leaves. Like everything is super colorful. And there's also music that starts playing, but it's not actually for her to hear. It's for us, the viewer, to hear. And this is very important here because this wouldn't have been in the book in the same way. It wouldn't have been talking about how dreary the real world was and how she grew up never seeing color until this moment. This was a tool that was used to express the story. It wasn't part of the story world. It was part of the discourse of it, and specifically used in order to convey this story because of the medium it was in. And even more so because in 1939, not very many movies were in color. So the fact that it transformed into color was a surprise and really brought it to life. And this is where the fact that what the storyteller can choose. So when you are creating a movie and you're a storyteller of a film, you're choosing how to express that story by how you're putting together the pieces. You're choosing if you're going to have a close-up shot or a zoomed out shot. You're going to choose if you have flashbacks or montages to express different moments of time. And, you know, are you going to have cutscenes, split screens, all of this? You're choosing as the storyteller of the movie how it's getting created. And you're doing it knowing exactly how the viewer is going to see it, that they're going to sit down and watch that movie, and you know that they're going to see it in the way you intend. But when you're creating a virtual environment, like what we did for Parliament Virtual Experience, we don't have that knowledge that it's going to be specific, like how they see it. Like our plan of what it's going to be like might be different due to how they interpret it. So when we first started really experimenting with how to create virtual environments and how to make it so then we could think about where people are going to look and pay attention, when we started thinking about being the storytellers of these spaces, we tried to figure out how we could make people want to look at things. And, you know, you can have big arrows pointing, look at me, touch this, this is the next step. But, you know, that's not exactly it. Best way. So we thought maybe we can do it through contrast. Maybe we can do it through having certain elements look more important. So our first experiments, we tried to mix like the model from the building information model that we had with photogrammetric elements such as these books. And it had an interesting contrast between the gray of the texture that the model was at that point and the photogrammetric books, and it did work. So this is kind of where we started when we started working into virtual Parliament. And for this project, so as I said, this is a collaborative project between the Library of Parliament and the National Film Board. And we were brought in to be the creators of the space that the story would be in. We didn't control the story, but we made the space. And what everyone kind of thought how it was going to work at first was that we were going to just press a button on the computer and export the existing building information model that we had, and then put it in Unity, and it would be done. Maybe we'd have to spend a little bit of time cleaning it up, but it'd be fine. But it's not actually that simple, mainly for one very restrictive reason. We had to consider the actual size of the model and the polygon count that it was. So in order to make the model in the virtual experience accessible to people, we needed to make it so then it fit within Unity's parameters of about 1 million to 1.5 million polygon count. This is what would make it so then most people, when they put on a headset, would be able to move around without there being lag, and you wouldn't need like a $8,000 computer to be able to run it. You can do it with the regular ones that people would have for VR. But when we first brought in the library model, so this one space, it was about 20 times that size. So clearly it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to be possible for us to just take the model. And that's when we knew that we really had to figure out how to reduce the model and carefully select what would be treated and how. And when we first were trying to figure this out, we knew, okay, we need to simplify. We need to really reduce and reduce and reduce. And if we approach this in a way that it was for the whole model, this reduction, we ended up with a space that was bare and void of character. And what we ended up with, which you can see on the right, has that character. And for this kind of space, this void of character thing, it still is a space. You can still picture how it can hold a story within it. You can picture this being in a video game that then you start to look for things and that. But it's not telling a story itself. It's only a shell that can have events within it. Whereas this, what we ended up with, has that story already in it. It expresses the importance of the building, and it's not just that shell for the story that will be layered on top. It becomes part of it. And in order to get this, we had to really think about every part of the model and understand why certain elements were important, because we couldn't put it all in. We couldn't just copy and paste it in. We had to choose what was the story of the building and how and what it was to do it. And that's where this idea of a level of detail came in. That we created a 3 level of detail 1, 1.5, and 2 to decide how much effort and detailing would be for certain elements. So level of detail 1 was things that we would take just the building information model, bring it in, reduce it quite a bit, and then use generic textures for it. Level of detail 1.5 was the building information model that then had real life textures applied that we pulled from photogrammetric models or photography or the point cloud data. And level of detail 2 were models that we created from photogrammetry, where we would take where you kind of generate a model from the actual real world object, that it's a very much of a replica of it and has a high polygon count. So those were for very important elements within the building. And then we had to look at each space that we were doing and look at each individual element and decide what level of detail it needed to be. So just this one corner of the Senate, you can see how we broke it down and we're like, these areas need to be level of detail 2, this 1.5, this 1. And then we're like, wow, there's a lot of level of detail 1s. We can't just treat them all the same. So we decided we needed to break those down even farther and created 4 levels of geometry. So these geometry levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 that also broke down level of detail 1 more to determine if it was a large surface like a wall for geometry level 1 versus smaller details like crown molding like geometry level 4. And then for this, we gave each category like level of detail 1 or 1.5 and geometry level 1 like a quota for how much polygon space they could take up. And even more so, we started looking at each individual object to know how much they could be as well. But to kind of get there, we had to figure out how do you actually evaluate what it should be. So we thought of 3 different things to consider when determining the level of detail it needed to be, which was proximity, significance, and storytelling. So for proximity, with the final experience that was created, it's a 15-minute experience that you're dropped into different locations and you're moved around to new locations. And as much as once you get dropped in that spot, you could theoretically move around quite a bit. You're not there very long and there's a story unfolding around you. So the likelihood is you're kind of staying put. Maybe a few feet here and there you'll move, but in general. So the creative team, the Library of Parliament, the National Film Board decided where the camera would be, where you'd get dropped. And they would relay this information to us so then we would know what needs to be close to the person, and therefore those things should be treated at a higher level of detail than things farther away. So for the rotunda, the first area that you get dropped in, we knew that you'd be put in the center of the rotunda. And this meant things farther away, like the Hall of Honor, we wouldn't have to detail so much. So here, this is level of detail 1 only elements for the rotunda area. And you can see that on the left, everything that's within that center area was treated at a lot higher level of detail than things far away, like the Hall of Honor, because you wouldn't ever really get that close to it. And then it came to significance. So we couldn't just treat every door the same way or every chair the same way. There were different values for each one. And so we had to look at objects and say, is this object significant to the building, to the heritage of it? And we would evaluate it. And so something like the door to the House of Commons and Senate, as much as they're very similar doors, they're about the same shape. They have the same purpose of going into this chamber where a lot of government activities happen, and we treated them differently because the House of Commons door, as much as it was a nice door, was just a wood door. The Senate door, however, had a lot of symbolism and was really important. It had the crest of each territory and province on it, and was a lot more ornate and important and significant because of that. So it became one of the most important elements within that space for us, that we gave it a lot of attention. We made it a photogrammetric model, taking up a lot of the polygon count within the space, and gave it the significance that it needed. So then when you're in one space versus the other in the Senate, you're probably going to stare at that door for a bit, whereas in the House of Commons, it's just a door. And this goes too as well with the models, the level of detail 2 elements, such as the statues, even they got treated at higher levels of importance depending on their significance. So this statue of the Queen Victoria that's in the Library of Parliament, we put a lot of attention into it. She took way more than any other model did to do, because we first gave her too much of a polygon count, reduced her too much, so she lost some of the interest, and kept going back and forth. So certain elements got treated way more important to ensure that they had that quality carry through. And then that last point is that storytelling. And so this became that we knew that certain elements needed to have prominence because they were important to the story of the building and the space, as well as the story that was going to get placed inside. And when we look at these two pictures again, side by side, of the Senate chamber without any difference of level of detail versus it is, when we look at the one that has the difference, there are 3 chairs in that space that seem way more important than the others, and that your eye just goes straight to. And these are the ones at the front, including the speaker's chair. But on the left, when they're all kind of treated the same, they don't seem as important. When all of a sudden you're putting more detail even into the elements that are far away, like those, like the speaker's chair, your eye gets drawn to them, that you see that they must be important. Someone spent time to put it in, that storyteller, that creator of the model, put the time and effort in it to draw your attention to it. So you know it's significant and you get the feeling of what's going on in the building. And this is true for artwork as well, that it's not just about the furniture and the architecture, but in some places we put more time into focusing on the artwork, such as in the Senate foyer. So I'm not going to explain exactly the process of how we went through and modeled it all. I'm just going to show this one diagram that said that it was not very easy at all and took a lot of different steps and a lot of different people. This was a very complicated project that we created multiple different workflows through different software. And this really helped because this meant that we can really analyze each piece within the space to a great degree. And this meant even more that we weren't just looking at a like, oh, the ceiling is level of detail 1 or 1.5. We would then break the ceiling down even more and be able to understand our steps to get there. So for the ceiling of the Senate chamber, for example, it was a combination between level of detail 1 and 1.5, with the 1.5 being the little crests that are there. And then even with the whole ceiling being level of detail 1, we then broke it down into more, so then different elements had a different treatment depending on what they were. And multiple people would work on this one part of the building. And the end result, well, we were very proud of it. We're very happy with how it turned out. Because what we created was this shell, this vessel to hold the story that contained part of the story as well. And so I'm going to show you now the series of pictures of our model, and then with a screenshot of the story within it from the actual experience. And so the tour itself goes through the same way that you go through a physical tour, that you start in the rotunda. And within the experience, the rotunda comes to life with different animals from the carvings coming out. Then you move to the House of Commons foyer, where in the experience, it becomes alive with a media scrum. So you start to understand the role that the media has in informing the public of what's going on in this area. You're brought into the House of Commons chamber, where in the experience, it becomes alive with the voices of a lively debate. And then within the Library of Parliament, it is then transformed into this magical space that really expresses kind of all of the knowledge that's within it and the significance of this space for the whole building. In the Senate foyer, you learn about the importance of the portraits and the monarch, how the monarchy is related through the portraits. And then the Senate foyer, Senate chamber. In here, once again, it comes to life with conversation of the Senates. And that's kind of where it ends. It brings you through the Peace Tower in the end, and you get to see the whole building that way. So I'm going to end with this slide here. And I like ending with this slide in this image. And this is an image from the model of the Library of Parliament. The reason why I end here is because I really think it helps express kind of one of the advantages of sharing spaces through the virtual world. And it's because in the Library of Parliament, it has this amazing floor. It's a beautiful floor. Lots of detail and attention and meaning is in that floor, but it's hidden with a carpet because you don't want to damage this floor. It's very nice. And then you'll also never get to see it in this view with the whole floor at once because you can't get up to this high and fly in the air. So this is one of the advantages of having this virtual model and showing and sharing this information this way is you get to see these things in a new perspective that you might not see it. So it's not, it still is the story of the building, but you get to learn about the story. You get to hear about that story using different mediums and change the discourse of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And as always, I've always felt this is you're a great storyteller yourself. So, and I love the example from The Wizard of Oz. It starts to bring in more, imagery into what you're saying. And this whole idea about the distinction between a story and a discourse, the storyteller and the author, or the copy and replica, I think we can take that up in the conversation part. And I'm really looking forward to that. Let's have Leah introduce our next speaker now.
Thank you, Katie, for your presentation. That was really, really insightful and interesting. I really enjoyed it. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Joy Sen. Thank you for joining us as well. Dr. Joy Sen, oh, sorry, my screen got flipped over. Dr. Joy Sen is professor and former head of the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur, West Bengal, India. He is currently chairman of the Nehru Museum of Science and Technology and co-professor in charge at the Academy of Classical and Folk Arts in Kharagpur, India. Dr. Sen's area of research includes community and regional planning and Indian cultural heritage documentation. He is currently associated with 2 mega projects sponsored by MHRD Government of India, the SAND HI Science and Heritage Mega Initiative, as well as the PI2 in the Future of Cities. Dr. Sen has been associated with Asia Pacific Network of Housing Research in Hong Kong as associate member, reviewer of the editorial board of Journal and Architecture, and with CSVTU's Research Journal as associate editor. He has authored 7 books on Indian heritage, iconographic documentation, and a textbook on sustainable planning in India by TERI, India Habitat Center in Delhi. Excuse me. He is a prime collaborator on projects with GSAPP, Ivy League, Columbia University, NYC USA, and MIT, Cambridge USA, and the mobilizer of narratives, in situ activities, and outreach exploration on Canadian Knowledge Systems, IKS, at IIT Kharagpur from 2020 onward. Thank you, Joy Sen, for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm audible. I think I'm doing fine. You can hear me? Okay. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, thank you. It was wonderful to watch Katie. What a wonderful presentation it was. And what a immersion it was to Canada, that wonderful parliament building. I was really engrossed in the way she was explaining and making the story. I think this presentation of mine is from another part of the world, which has almost the same aspirations, but just expressed in a different way. So I have 2 stories for you. One is about a very important building which came to a city called Kolkata, which was almost established by the British about 300 years back when the British came to India. I think the story about the British coming to India and the British coming to the US or Canada is almost the same. Towards the end, the 2 stories end in 2 different ways, but otherwise, in both ends, the local people, including the Europeans in the US, in America, and the Indians in India itself, they're fighting the British. So this was a building, which was the town hall, which was an experience which changed its use over the time. And against that, I have a contrasting story, which is about Varanasi, which is a very ancient city. It remains in the Guinness Book of Records as one of the oldest sustainable habitat for about 4,000 years or so. And it means the city of light, which is a very famous book written by Diana L. Eck of Harvard. She's from the School of Architecture and Design at Harvard. So these are the 2 stories which I'm going to share with you. And the most interesting thing is that these are 2 life projects which I have worked on in the last 5 or 6 years, which is Varanasi, and especially last 2 years, especially within the COVID-19 situation, which is a town hall experience. So the questions here are, which Katie has already explained, what exactly is the reality that's behind these experiences, and to what extent we have been virtual, and how have we designed and managed the 2 different situations? What has been the extent of experience and immersion, and to what extent have we used technology to produce some cultural change? That's a question or a statement that we normally make. But there can be another question which I'll try and answer in this presentation, which is that even though technology causes a lot of cultural change, but is there a reverse direction? Is there a story which talks about a backward linkage where culture itself demands a lot of technological change? And if the answer is yes, then how we adapt to that? So I think these 2 stories are stories which try and explain both of them from a slightly different angle from the story which Katie had from the Canadian experience. So I'll take over the next 15 to 20 minutes to take you through a small journey about these two experiences. So in these experiences, we had strategies to plans, and then we had domains to designs, and we had a general experience of how we had designed, and we also had a deep experience. And finally, I'll try and end with a passage which takes us to some level of greater truth and really try and explain what exactly it is. So the techno-narrative that Katie has already explained is, what constitutes and characterizes the translation from the real to the virtual in a cultural context. And I think it was very evident in the presentation that preceded me. And but in the two experiences that I have, I'm going to share with you regarding town hall and the Varanasi. So one is a story that is within a building, and the other is a story that is not within a building, but it's outside in a city. In fact, the entire city, which sits on one of the ancient rivers of India, which is Ganges or Ganga, is a living laboratory. It's like a huge urban design, urban rejuvenation experience. All the buildings and all the hearts, they constitute that experience itself. So I'm going to take you, like Katie took you to the Wizard of Oz, I'm going to take you through an experience of another movie which talks about what is real, what is virtual, and what are the concordances and divergences, and what exactly are the design experiences, and what is the ideal outcome, what is the real outcome, and what should be more than the ideal outcome, if there is something more than ideal outcome at all. So I take you to a movie which has been popularized in the last 7 or 8 years, which is by the director of Titanic, who made this movie called The Avatar, which is about war and equivalence. And there's a group of people who think they're technologically very advanced. They have the best tool under the sun with science and machines and algorithms, and the best guns and the best ammunitions and the best mode to destroy people in other planets. So they come and take over the other planet, and they think they're all tribal peoples, and they're pretty backward, and they don't have the right technology and understand the people of the earth. So they have an equivalence. They have a story of an equivalence with this planet, which they cannot understand, which they cannot explain, which they cannot really feel and really touch and really make their own. So they want to aggress and invade and take over the whole planet and call it a Pandora, a Pandora's box. So the whole war leads to an equivalence. So the two stories that I have is almost close to that. So this is James Cameron with Avatar, and you can see how the Earth people is trying to take over the planet, and how finally the movie ends, where that little girl shoots, like a story in the Indian mythology. There is a goddess who kills the final victim or the villain of the movie, by taking up an arrow. And it exactly happens in the same way in the American movie directed by James Cameron. Now, this same movie has another side, which is deeper than the design experience, which is about peace and enlightenment. And here the movie takes a much deeper turn, and it shows that the technological aid can only alter, and it can only reinforce and morph and recalibrate the understanding to only a marginal extent. Technology is fine, technology is all wonderful, but there is a deeper ethos in that planet. There is a deep psyche that remains within the nature, the connection within the creatures of that planet and nature itself, a very deep neural networking, which is based on the advances of biosciences, bioneural networking, biotechnology, and the very subtle vibrations that make the entire planet, all its living beings, the creatures, and the play of the other planets in the system, the night and the day, the way the other things move as one single system. So the technology of the Earth, with all its machines, at a certain state of understanding and progress and development, is not able to understand that level of science which exists in a planet which the Earth people unfortunately calls Pandora. So our shortcoming, our marginalization sort of restricts us to understand what exactly is peace and what exactly is meant by enlightenment. When you see that wonderful color blob, that little grain from the flower comes and descends on that boy and forms an avatar body and confirms that he's just not an ordinary human being, but he's an extraordinary human being, having all the senses and having all the advanced human emotions, human neural networking, and human science-driven approaches to understand a much larger reality, a much larger planetary consciousness, and a much larger system in the cosmos. So the movie actually has an iteration, and it shuttles between the two truths. On the one hand, it is war and equivalence. On the other hand, it is peace and enlightenment. So with this background, I'll take you to the first story of mine, which is the town hall experience. And this is a little drone picture that we took of the building when it was all COVID in Kolkata. So we had to work for this project because the funds were limited and the clients were really pressurizing on us. So this is the town hall experience, which is an iconic architecture. It's a centroid of tourism. It talks about the city during the colonial times, and the British actually made this building to show their might and power in the Indian regime. But today, through the next 200 years since they made the building, it got converted to a city hall, then a town hall, and finally it became some level of museum. And today, the entire municipal corporation of Kolkata is trying to convert it into a full-fledged museum and have a rejuvenation plan. So it's trying to bring in a lot of entrepreneurship development within the city itself. So this is about the entire project, about a city which is also called the City of Joy, which is not my city, but it is a city which has been written by a great author, that is Dominic Lapierre, which talks about a city which is identified as a city of mob. It is identified as a city of culture. It is identified as a city of music and movie making. And a movie has been made on this city, where despite the squalor and the lower levels of affordability, a bit of poverty that exists in the city, there is an embedded strength of happiness and joy which exists in the city. But despite all that, right in the city, about 1893, some person called John Gostin had developed this building and had designed this building in a Roman Doric style. So at that point of time, it was very alien. The people of the city was not knowing what exactly was happening to the city, because the city grew as the British developed their control and power over the city. And initially, it was like a representation of the British might. It was like an expression of the British power. It was like a certitude of the British dominion in India. And Kolkata at that point of time, which was known as Calcutta, was the capital of India. So the British used this building full-blown, full expanse, and with all the gravity as a landmark of to what extent they could control the whole of the Indian subcontinent from the city of Kolkata. So this is the whole background about the building. And through about a period of 200 years, this building has changed and it has gone through a lot of history, which is a fairly complex and very complicated. And before independence of India in 1947, and after 1947, the next 70 years, and then the changing politics of Bengal, of which Kolkata is the capital. And finally, movies are made in and around this building, like this famous movie which you see, where you can see a Western, very known actor, walking with the Indian actors, and I think you can identify who is. And he's also the same person who acts in very prominent movies, and he comes and he uses this building for to express what is actually the city of joy, what is actually joyful in this building despite too much of population in the city, too much of crowdedness in the city, a lot of squalors in the city, poor maintenance of the city. Despite that, the city has a wonderful fabric. So we are given a great challenge to work out three important narratives about the city. So the first narrative that we took was to look at the Renaissance of Bengal which almost happened at the same time when England was going through the Industrial Revolution. So this was something very interesting between India and United Kingdom. But the difference was that United Kingdom was a ruler and India was a country which was ruled. That was a fundamental difference. So India was used as a backyard, and many people in the city became the richest persons of India, which was the House of Tagore, if you have heard about that family. And the House of Tagore started patronizing some of the basic families of Kolkata, and they wanted to bring about the reformation and the modernization. So in our town hall museum, we have discovered these stories about a parallel movement of reformation and the techno-industrial modernization. So there was one part which was going in alliance with the British form of industrialization and modernization, and there was another part which was reformation, where the Indians were revolting against the British. So it was like a two-pronged journey. So there was industrialization on the one hand, and there was also a protest against industrialization on the other hand. So it was a duty for us to design these scapes in the town hall, which was not a very simple task. So it was just not making realities and designs and panels, but it was also doing a lot of research on the city and bringing about the three truths. So this is number one. So the second one, we walked on the Renaissance of Bengal, which was all about a different ball game, which is not very well known in the West, except for the people who are interested in yoga and things like that. Even the Canadian Center for Mindful Habitat has a small little thing which is known as Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which means it comes from the ancient Indian philosophy, which says there is one indwelling spirit that pervades the whole universe. And whether I'm a Canadian or an Indian, whether I'm a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew or a Baptist, I am interlinked fundamentally by a common divinity. There's a single divinity which pervades the whole universe. So India as a civilization had spent a lot of time for about a few thousand years in the search for this internal immersive reality, which is spirituality, which is just not organized religion, but it is spirituality. It is spirituality. And in this, there was a huge recovery, and mind it, even a lot of British missionaries who came to Kolkata. You can see the picture of Mr. William Joseph Wilkins, who was a London Missionary Society person. And he came to Kolkata with Bamford, and he had spent his entire life in looking at the Indian texts of spirituality, on yoga, on the Vedas, on the Tantras. And this is how the first libraries of Indian religious, spiritual, esoteric, deep ecological texts were first documented by the British. So this is absolutely a different side. This is not the side of the British that we know as imperial people, as invading people and as aggressive people. These are the wonderful missionaries who came from Scotland and Ireland, and they had a different eye for India, and they wanted to touch India in the same way the father touches the son. That beautiful painting in the Sistine Chapel. So this connection between the father and the son, the connection between an alien culture or Indian culture, or between the British culture and an alien culture like India, was a fundamental portion of the Renaissance, which needs to be rediscovered. Even a person like William Hastie, who was a professor of religion and philosophy from Scotland, teaching at a school in the General Assembly Institution of Kolkata, when he was explaining Wordsworth, who is one of the greatest poets of the United Kingdom, he had to revert back while explaining the reveries and the ecstasies and the spiritual, experiences of Wordsworth. He resorted to a priest from a Hindu Indian temple. So that led to the connection between two great minds. You may not be knowing them. One was Ramakrishna, and the other person was Vivekananda. So at the back end of Bengal's Renaissance, at the back end of India's Renaissance, there was a superb contribution, which is relatively unknown, which we want to document and bring it to the town hall, so that we don't create a story of divide and rule like one half of James Cameron's Avatar has created, but we create a story of unification and assimilation, which the other half of the story of James Cameron's Avatar has created. That's why I shared those slides with you. So this entire town hall is just not putting stories here and there, but it's trying to recover the stories which are deep and talks about the underlying connections between civilization. That's very, very important. That's the second wave. And the third and the last wave is about science, because about 150 years back, Indian science was almost parallel with British science, which was #1 in the world. And Indian scientists were producing the top scientists who are working with the best scientists in the world. Like Vivekananda worked with Nikola Tesla in Chicago, and Jagadish Chandra Bose, J.C. Bose, worked with the scientists in Europe, in London, and even Neville Moat, one of the Nobel laureate in 1977. You can read that. He said that some of the Indian scientists like J.C. Bose were at least 60 years ahead of the time world science was about 120 years back. So that was the position of Kolkata, where it was a wonderful renaissance between scientific progress and educational revival. So I talked about three stories, the industrial revival and the patronage, the spiritual revival and the patronage, and the scientific revival and the patronage. So this is a story that we are portraying in the town hall. Just not ordinary stories and stories that you normally read in a book or get it in Google or some other such, but stories which has been suppressed. Stories, if they're told, will improve the understanding between different sections of people across the world, and the story which will actually make town hall a town hall of Kolkata, which is the capital city of India. So these are the three narratives, and we have about 12 more narratives like this, but we have a paucity of time, so I cannot share with you all the stories. So I picked up just three. So with this, we created a very simple, affordable solution. So this is an internal side of a building, and we created an interlinked research theme, a combination of ordinary panels and digital panels having different elements of design, and using a combination with the Department of Tourism, using a bit of Internet of Things, developing ad hoc data organization, and interconnecting that with Cylindro tracking light systems, with a lot of video recording systems built in within the things, and having different kinds of camera networks which can be tilted and zoomed and panned. And the basic systems which has been used is Planar, which is combined with an IBM system. So they are going to be the electronic contractors of the town hall, probably in the next 1 year, to take care of the job. So with this, we designed, we really worked on the distribution of the panels, which is a combination of the analog and the digital. We could not change anything within the building because this is a frozen building, this is a heritage building. But within that, we tried to create these environments. And the main focus of the entire museum was Bengal Renaissance. And so that's what we did. And this is how some of our design options had looked like. So the entire floor was roughly divided into a 3x3, like a Rubik's Cube transition. And this is how the entire thing has been designed. And if you look at the section, this is how the things were placed. And you can just see a glimpse of the building without the things which we are planning to do. So this is actually the final thing that we are doing. So we are doing a design inside the town hall. We are creating it as a design space. We are linking it through the Internet of Things with the Department of Tourism at the city level, at the airport level, at the railway station level, at the bus terminus level, so that the ordinary people, the extraordinary people who walks into the city gets a connection to come to the town hall and see what Kolkata was and what Kolkata shall be. So with this, I come to the end of town hall, and I'll go to the second experience, and I have to be a little fast. And this is about absolutely a different experience, which is Varanasi, which is a city almost like Jerusalem, or you can say to an extent Alexandria, even older than Alexandria. I mean, the archaeology of Varanasi goes to about 2500 BCE. And we worked on Varanasi for the last 5 or 6 years. And we had 2 collaborations with Columbia University, their graduate school, and finally with Georgia Tech at Atlanta with their Geographical Information Systems School. So we looked at the whole city, and And we discovered that the entire city is actually a living repository. The entire city is a museum. It is a museum of art. It is a museum of music. And different portions of the city has different performances. It is the museum of different schools of philosophy, languages, and sciences. And more important than that, it is a seat of spirituality where the Buddha himself got enlightened. So this is also a city of the Buddha, who has influenced almost half of the world with his ideas about a different version of spirituality. And this has a fantastic sacred landscape. And this is a seat of spirituality where different religions like Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, they all coexist as a single celebration. And in Varanasi, the most important thing is a celebration of death. Because in the Indian philosophy, you don't die, you actually don't die, you actually leave your body because the soul is immortal. That's a foundation of Indian meta-sciences and Indian metaphysics. And the entire city is actually a living demonstration of this philosophy. You may have a philosophy written in a book, but the whole city celebrates this living philosophy of India through all its art forms, all its musical forms, all its philosophical forms and language forms. So we did a tour of the city, and we found out a wonderful quotation by the American humorist, traveler, explorer Mark Twain, who came to Varanasi about 100 years back. And he was really amazed by looking at this city. The whole city is like a theater. It's like one of those Greek amphitheaters. Almost every ghat drops down to the east face side of the river, and every ghat has places for bathing, has places for festival, for yoga, for meditation, for exchanges, for dialogues, for someone sitting with a guitar and playing. So this is absolutely a living museum. So we were really confused that what we should do with the city. So then we thought we cannot take the whole city, on the whole, but instead we should look at small fragments and look at the elements of design and look at different sections of the city so that we can sort of advance them, improve them to a certain extent, and just bring back some of the meanings which could have been lost in the passage of time. So that was a pretty tough exercise. And we had a lot of workshops with experts within Varanasi and from outside. As I told you, people came from the United States. They're very enlightened people, and who have, and I also had a talk with Diana at Harvard. She has written a book on Varanasi. So we had a huge thing to learn. So before we started designing for Varanasi. So in other words, Varanasi is starting designing our own minds and our own reality. And the designer within us started changing. And we could then understand that Varanasi is much, much older than the known fathoms of history. It's much older than tradition, and it's even older than legend, and looks twice as old if you put the history and the tradition and the legend together. This is the realization of Mark Twain about this beautiful city called Varanasi. I will always request, if you ever get a chance, come to India, come to Varanasi. It's a city which will give you an experience which I'll explain in the next few slides. So we did not decompose, but we discovered through a lot of discussion about 8 small projects. So one of them was to activate a small heritage walk. And we did a case of just 500 meters. We did not take anything more than that. And it was about a ghat. And we used the GIS, the Geographical Information Systems, as a technology to do all the work with GPS and the GPR, which is the Great Penetrating Radiant. We did a lot of archaeological work. That was the first project. I'll explain that in the next 2 or 3 slides. And then we did an exercise on the Rajghat, which is absolutely in the north of Varanasi, which is an urban ecosystem. It's much greener. And this is a place where Buddha had come about 2,700 years back for his meditation. So we did a different kind of an approach for that. And then we did a meditation app development so that the people who come to Varanasi, they understand the different traditions of yoga, Hatha yoga, Raj yoga, Dhyana yoga, Kriya yoga, and different kinds of yogas which exist in Varanasi for about 3,000 years or even more than that. So there was a lot of technology which was applied to put them into record and make people understand some of these abstruse, intangible heritage in more tangible explanatory forms. That was the third project. And then we did a small urban design cluster augmentation in Varanasi, also on the basis of the apps. We did a fifth project, which was an exhibition, which was on iconography and epigraphy, and we used a lot of softwares like Illustrator, Adobe, CS softwares, and our Columbia friends did a wonderful work on this in project number 5. Then we did a project on the old age people, because Varanasi is not for old age, but people who are senior citizens. They come to Varanasi to pass away, to leave their body and enter the kingdom of light. The kingdom of heaven is inside you, and it's inside and it's outside in the entire cosmos. So this is the philosophy which the city teaches. So old age homes are not typical old age homes that you see in New York or in Delhi or in Japan or in Rome, but in Varanasi, old age home is all about meditation, all about spiritual aspiration, all about respect. So we actually encountered a different immersive reality about Varanasi, and we did an econometric analysis, a cost-benefit analysis of this new approach for old age people, whom we cannot call old people, but senior, respectable people. And then we did a special small plan on a pedestrian stretch, piloting a small area. And one of my colleagues did a special project with the ministry on this, which was another separate project. And finally, as an eighth one, we did a end of life care of reconfiguring the old age in Varanasi by using a healthcare app. And this is a project which got a little famous, and there's a lot of media. So if you search Google and put IIT Kharagpur, Varanasi, you'll find some of these. I think they're still there in the media as living testimonies and evidences. So with this, these are some of a little visual evidence of 2 or 3 projects like the Heritage Trail, where you can see the different experiences, something which I think you'll all enjoy, the balconies, the stairs, the experiences, the fenestrations, the sharp lanes that you have even in Rome, like the catacombs of Rome, under the Sistine Chapel, the ghats, the experiences in the evening when the sun sets on the other side, the experiences in the morning when the sun sets in the morning, sun rises in the morning. So these are the things that we really walked on the Heritage Trail. And as you move on, what do you encounter? Do you encounter an ashram, monastery, a small temple, a tree, a meditation point, or a place where somebody is doing some massage or doing some yoga? So we linked all those experiences and developed a stretch plan and finally a master plan. And then we augmented our urban ecosystem innovation, which was on the north of Varanasi, which is about the sacred geography. And this was actually a master's thesis done by one of my student, Moli, and we had gone to full depth into this and did a detailed urban design working drawing exploration of this. And we also had developed, as I told you, we developed a meditation apps development using feedback from various Varanasi meditation traditions, and this became pretty famous. And we connected that with the other projects, which is about old age people and end of life care, because life is ending only to the body, but the soul remains. So there's a whole larger definition about life and living and livability. So the ability to live in Varanasi is of a much larger kind. It's of a much greater kind than we normally live in a material life where everything is determined by technology and material ends. We don't have a larger meaning to life. I mean, we don't have an access to the kingdom of heaven, which is not only outside you, but it is also inside you. That's what the Bible says, and that's also the Indian Upanishads say. So they almost say the same thing, but somehow these traditions have been lost. So in this project, we wanted to revive and immerse in this what do you call non-real abstruse and bring them back to real. So the entire project had an inversion. It had an inversion, and with that, we did a cross section from the river, through the ghats, through the activities on the ghats, and then we took it inside the ghats and we cut through the buildings and went to the economy that runs through the entire city. So we had about 6 projects back to back, one after another, through which we could rediscover the city as a center of creative economy, which is not a top down, but it has emerged. The little river, the flower that is born in the city, the adobe, or the terracotta, the wattle and daub products that we use. Everything is inlaid and indigenous. So these are the theories of Charles Landry and others. So we used a lot of creative economy, and we developed ICT to boost the creative economy of the city itself. So finally, we worked on various aspects. So we worked on its language, which we call its Bhasa. So we had techno-narratives about to explain all these facilities through language. We had Itihash, which in India means history. So we had historical narratives. We had Ankana, which is iconography. So we had visual narratives about these activities. We had Shilpa, which is industrial narratives. And we had river, because the entire connection of the city is through the river. So we had a river-driven narrative of each and every activity in the city itself. And this we connected with a wonderful explanation about the city. I don't know whether I can explain this in a minute, because I think time is flowing. And because the entire city has a wonderful arrangement of the river, because the river comes from the Himalayas, from the north, and goes to the ocean, which is in the south, which is the Indian Ocean, and finally the Bay of Bengal, and finally the Indian Ocean. But the river at Varanasi takes a northbound turn. It becomes, so it's going from the origin to the destination, but finally it turns. So people think that when the river turns, it creates a magnetic field in this area, and that's why the city has become just not material, but also spiritual. So we have tried to work on this, and we have found out something which can be only explained by the science of what you call resonance. So it is just not understanding the city at the physical level, the ghats, the buildings, but also understanding the city at a mental level. But for that, you need a calmer mind. The mind needs to be settled. And then you come back to the city again and again and again and again. And then the city becomes a cultural memory. Even though you come back to Ottawa, you go back to New York, friends of mine from New York said, the memories of Varanasi is in my mind, and I feel like meditating even though I am in New York. So Varanasi has entered his psyche. So it becomes cognitive, it becomes mythical, because it is just not historical, but it's repetitive over time. So what was repeated by someone else in Varanasi enters you and changes you. So the immersive reality is just not by the machines, but it's also by the urban design and by the urban rejuvenation. And if you can go ahead, it becomes cosmological. So do we have a theory to explain this? Yes, we have a theory to explain this. And this was explained in the 1930s by a great professor at MIT, USA. He was Professor Norbert Wiener. And he explained these 4 levels of experiences. So we got an access to Wiener's wonderful job. And by using Wiener's algorithm, which is cybernetics, we could explain the deep embedded philosophical ethos of Varanasi. Philosophy not as a theory, but philosophy as a way of life, where the virtual is actually a meditative reality, and you're immersed into that planetary consciousness, which was portrayed in that movie called Avatar by James Cameron. So that the technological perfection that we have reached in the earth is not good enough to understand that larger reality and that larger consciousness. That's why I showed you that movie, to explain what exactly Varanasi is. So your understanding of the reality shifts from the physical to the mental. If you can do that, it's good. But if you can become cognitive, it's very good. But if you can become meditative and cosmological, it's excellent. Then you understand what is Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Then you know that a Christian or a Hindu or a Baptist or a Jew, they're all alike, because the divinity inside is spiritual. It's not determined by a single religion. It belongs to all the religions all over the world. And you reach that universal level of philanthropy, altruism, humanity, and interconnectedness. So this is the understanding which Varanasi had imparted us. So this is something which we picked up from Japan in a conference where we have papers and published papers. We call it eco-balance. It's a connection. It is not only a connection that you saw in the previous slide within an individual, but it's also a connection between individuals across times. So the meditations and the experiences that was realized by Buddha and others 2,500 years back or even earlier is again repeated today. So these are eternal truths which cuts across individual within a specified zone of time, or it cuts across various individuals over a very large frame of time. This is something which we call eco-balance. And you try to bring the two together. So one is cybernetics of the immersive reality, one is eco-balance, that is the connection between of the environment and the ecology, which is all around you. So when you bring the two things together, you get a different definition of what is real and what is virtual. That's my take on today's presentation, and that is what I wanted to share with you. So you bring the two things together. So it is just not ICT driven technology that takes us from the real to the virtual, but it is also neural sciences, deep sciences within our physiology, within our nervous system, which is meditation, and the immersive reality, which can be helped by meditative sciences, which again brings us back from the virtual to the real. And is this something very new? No, it is not. I mean, so I give you about 10 or 12 people who have talked about this. You have Gregory Bateson, and then you have Arne Naess, then you have Abraham Maslow, then you have Al Gore, you have James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, then you have Christopher Alexander, and then you have Arnold Toynbee, then you have Mira Alfaza, then you have Patrick Geddes, and then you have Patrick Geddes, and finally you have the two greatest scientists. The last one is Ilya Prigogine, who talked about all that when he got his Nobel Prize in nonlinear dynamism and chemistry. So that is how you bring the two realities together, and that is how I mean you form a much larger or a much deeper and a much bigger idea about the total reality of what is real and what is virtual, and what is the connection of the microcosm, the small reality, which is rolling on the microcosm, which is also rolling on the macrocosm. So you talk about just not complementarities, but about a co-evolution between the two, and you have an access to a much greater truth. So with this, I just end. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. That was wonderful. And the ideas that came out of those are huge. I think have to wrap my head around it. But they're great cues into how different people have looked at the idea of the virtual and the real. And both your presentations, I think, brought this idea of cultural memory. How are we bringing that back to our lives, and also the idea of storytelling, the idea of the real and virtual, and as you explained, Dr. Sen, the idea of a meditative reality. I really like that concept of the virtual being one of meditative reality, which I think, Katie, you also are trying to say it's not a linear reality that we are presenting. You want to immerse the user, have them think about it, have that inquisitiveness, and try and find out about various things other than what is physically present. So I want to open up the floor for you to try and talk about some of these elements. But some of the things that I wanted to probably hear about is also what kind of a story is this digital story that Dr. Sen, you are talking about as a meditative reality, the virtuality as a meditative reality, or is it a prequel, a sequel to that cultural memory? Is it a complementary, an avatar, a copy, or a replica? I think these are certain aspects that came out for me today. And in the meantime, I would also urge the audience to put in any questions that they may have for our speakers.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, should I answer or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's up to you and Katie about what you feel about each
Katie
other.
I think we can go in the same sequence. Maybe Katie starts. Yeah.
Sure. I still have to wrap my head around some of the things that you were saying. I think there was a lot of things that you were talking about that were that I pulled out as like and wrote notes on that I found really interesting. But there was a few that you were mentioning, like micro proposals and multiple narratives, and I really liked how you were talking about kind of in that way that in order to tell these stories, you weren't just telling one, you were doing it in multiple different ways. And the one that really struck to me, and I was kind of wanting to hear more about how the outcome went, was the meditation app, because it was such an interesting idea that it's no longer about someone being told the story. It's about them experiencing it, experiencing something, and really being immersed into not what the narrative is, but maybe about, as you're saying, like the requirements for the meditation to be able to reach the virtual. Um, and I was hoping to understand how that that meditation app kind of fits in with all of the other narratives that were part of that story.
Okay, okay. That was I think that was really an enigma, because the meditation app was not a linear production. The meditation app had different features and different priorities. The meditation app was of one kind when it meant for what it meant for the tourists who are coming to the city for the first time. The meditation app was absolutely different for the old people who had come for the last maybe 15, 20 years, and they were in the city, waiting for that final moment, of releasing their body and entering the kingdom of God. And there were other meditations apps between the two extremes, which talked about informations about different schools of meditations, because Varanasi had a very complex evolution of different meditation systems. And there were certain meditations which emphasized. I'll make it very simple. There's certain meditation apps which emphasized more on service and karma, which is about actions, actions. So they wanted to show a certain group of actions, say like maintaining gardens in an ashram or a monastery. And how do you sort of revert all that experience back into an experience with flowers? And as the flower blooms and it falls on the ground, and then there's a next flower which takes its place. So how does the recurrence of flowers after flowers, the recurrence of seasons after seasons, the recurrence of the water flowing in the river is also recurring with the flow of life, which is immortal? And how do you move? So that takes us to transmigration and metempsychosis, which is the foundation of Indian philosophy. Just not one life, but different lives. So there's a law of causation. There are different chains of sequences. So broadly, there were, if I make it very simple, the IIT team almost came up with, I think, 3 different kind of meditation apps. One, a very simple one for the tourist, one for veterans who are already there in the city. They know the city much more than any one of us. And the third one is about people who are interested. They have just come to Varanasi for maybe a month or 15 days and interested in some kind of yoga, maybe a mindfulness yoga, which comes from the Buddhist school, the Japanese school, or it's about Kriya Yoga, which comes from a school of Yogananda and Muktananda, who have also practiced in the US, or it is some kind of a straightforward yoga which Buddha had practiced based on breathing cycles. You do nothing but just calm down your breathing, and then you concentrate on the breathing, and then the breathing takes you somewhere else. So you start with a void, and then you enter a column of light. So that's like a third or a fourth school of meditation. So our meditation apps was just not a world within. As I give you that example of that garden, so every meditation app had a wash back. It had a backwash from an external environment where it all starts. Maybe the river, maybe those ghats, the steps, maybe those monasteries, maybe the service that you're doing to a temple, which has, these morning times, it has those rituals, and the bell just goes tum, kind of thing. So that sound of the bell gives you the eternal sound of, like in Christianity, we have Amen, Hallelujah, those kind of eternal sounds, eternal. So these are like sonic and visual, so light and sound driven meditation apps. So light and sound, I'll end with this, were the 2 fundamental features of these meditation apps, starting from very simple exposures, and then taking the whole, the person who is experiencing to a slightly higher level, because these experiences cannot be imparted to you all of a sudden. It might create a mental jar or an imbalance. So there's a science of, it has got a school level, a college level, and a very advanced PhD level. Even meditation has those levels. So the apps that we are all talking about are all school level meditation apps. School level meditation, very simple, very ordinary. At the very grounded level. I think I'll end there. Thank you.
I think like the reason why this meditation apps is kind of so interesting in my mind too is because of that connection that you bring to Avatar as well. But the idea that it's no longer just about, like, in the Avatar movie, the characters they become, like, they immerse themselves fully in the alien culture in order, well, they immerse themselves fully in their culture. And that's kind of the interesting thing about, like, virtual reality as well, and all of these things. They're all about immersing yourself in, to have, not to necessarily just have the story come in front of you, but to be part of that story. And when we always talk about virtual and video games and things, and Avatar is very much a virtual experience there. But all of a sudden we can realize how we can actually connect this, not just with a digital virtual, but maybe with, like, a more of a consciousness virtual, which is a really interesting way to kind of connect these stories together. So
yeah, actually there's a new science which is all about noetic science, Noetic, noetic sciences, which works on the science of vibrations and auras and human feelings. And they have a very high frequency, and there's absolutely a different level of algorithm and different level of vibrational sciences, very high-end electrocommunication systems to actually arrest that, tap that, and then translate that, and then make codes and programs on that, and then make the immersive reality. So this is, I think, the next 50 or 70 years of bioscience-driven, consciousness science-driven meditation apps. I mean, this could be the future, where I think the entire future of immersive reality shifts from pure information technology-driven sciences to more biotechnology-driven information sciences. So that was the thing which I was trying to harp or underpin in this presentation. So the Avatar movie, in certain way, actually pinned that, and it showed at the end of the movie that simple things, empathy, philanthropy, a time for others, and trying to watch others and dealing with others with respect and assimilation and inclusion are probably as important as what kind of technology that you use. I mean, so you need a combination of values and technology and values. So value-driven technology and technology-driven values. So technology and social change or culture and technology, so culture, society, and technological change. So there's a backward and forward linkage between the two elements. So when the two comes together, those were my last two slides, you reach a much larger paradigm of the integration, or you can say composition. Maybe that's the next 50 years, or the next 25 years, or the next 30 years. We don't know. Probably Mai and Stephen are going to work on that when they're in my age, that kind of there's a lot of that in Oriental culture, but they don't have the technology. There's a lot of that in Western culture. They have the technology, but they don't have the Oriental touch. So the world today is moving into a bridge, a connection between the East and the West. So that's what my presentation was trying to harp on. That was a underlying current of the whole presentation. Thank you.
Katie, I don't know what you think about when Dr. Sen was talking about the 4 levels of the physical, then the mental, the cognitive, and the cosmological. What are your thoughts on that in terms of, like, you worked in the virtual and real, and this idea of cultural memory and imagination that you're trying to bring in through the real and virtual, and Dr. Sen has provided that the framework of the 4 levels. What do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, Definitely some of it feels like it might be a little above my head right now. But I think the idea of like the multiple different levels, uh, it comes to the idea of engagement, that, I mean, be there 2 levels, 4 levels, 8 levels. The more we engage all of these different
Yep.
ways, the more we kind of understand. And I think if we can figure out a way to use different modes of storytelling to engage the multiple different levels there are of understanding and like of reality, then we'll be able to communicate more. And so that's when I presented them the 4 different stories or of the same, or the 4 different tellings of the same story. The reason one of those, why that's such a good idea to tell a story multiple times in different ways, is because every time you kind of get a different understanding and you learn a little bit more. And so sometimes reading a book can be the best way of understanding something. Sometimes meditation can be a better way. Taking a walk, all of this, and then fully immersing yourself in some kind of game can also. And so the more that we can try to do different ways of engagement, I think the better we'll have as a fully understand of a topic. So.
Yep. I think the key word which Katie mentioned that's very, very important, which is the different degrees of engagement. That is the key word. I mean, you go and watch a movie, and you don't like that movie. Even 10 minutes of that movie will look like 3 hours to you, and you want to get out of the movie hall. And then you watch a movie which is so interesting, and the movie is all like 2.5 hours, but as if the movie just gets over. These are simple examples of the relationship between level of engagement and time dilation. And the movie looks like about 20 minutes, the 2 hours of movie. So time, the experience of time and the degrees of engagement, which begins with the initial stages, and whether, as Katie said, we have 4 stages or 8 stages or 16 stages, that's not so important. But when you cross the degree of engagement beyond a certain level, it becomes immersive. And that is where you move from the mental to the cognitive, And when your cognitive knowledge becomes very rich, it becomes extremely rich. By reading that book again and again and again. You read Christopher Alexander's book 5,000 times, 500 times. So you're almost one with Christopher Alexander. You're almost living with him because he lives in that book and you live with him with that book. So you are in the cognitive, so you recognize, so your cognitive becomes recognitive. It becomes recognitive. And recognition is a very important thing in immersion. And if that happens to you very successfully, maybe you can enter a very large level. That's very exceptional. That's a 4th level, which is cosmological. And you get the whole space. I mean, you go beyond a building and you can touch the whole space. You look at the whole planet, the whole solar system. In the NASA scientists used to call that the overview effect. So because when they went out in satellites into the space, they no more felt they were people of Earth and or a system. And they had by staying there for a long, long time, they transcended the ideas of what is day and what is night, what is heliocentric and what is geocentric. And they had an effect which is called overview. So there was a book which was published by NASA, the experiences of the astronauts in space. And those experiences are very close to the experiences that we have in the Oriental sages. They're almost same. The one thing happened through technology in the external laboratory. The other thing happened through the internal laboratory, which is immersive, which is biophysiological. Maybe the 2 laboratories are different, but the intentions are the same. The intentions are the same. That's where they converge. Yeah.
I like that you brought up the word immersion. My favorite definition of immersion comes from Janet Murray, who wrote Hamlet in the Holodeck, and she describes it. And I mean, I even find her description is immersive because I can picture it. And she says, immersion is like jumping into a pool of water, and when you're in the water and it's just clear, it's all around you, and like you've totally left like the former world that you were in, dry land and oxygen. And I mean, and that's kind of like the goal a lot of the times is when we're showing these experiences, and it can be like a website, it can be a tour, like like a guided tour on with an audio device, but you're trying to make it so then they feel transported, that they have that sense of presence, of that they're feeling there in these other environments of these stories and narratives. In my opinion, I think that engagement, that interactivity, that providing of them the agency to have like control over the unfolding of the story, so they feel like they're partly the storyteller, is one of the ways that we can do that, by giving them the sense of control, even if we give them the objects that they're controlling.
Yeah. Wonderful. So you used another very interesting word, which is unfolding. So that takes us to physics, and there's a great scientist, a Nobel laureate, David Bohm. So he gave us two processes. One is the unfolding of things, and the other is enfolding of things. You know, it enfolds also. So the story unfolds to you, and I mean, you unfold towards the story, and the story unfolds towards you. You know, so there's like two-way journey. And he says that this is one of the foundations. You know, yeah, it is surreal. Yeah, it is quite surreal, as Pallavi says. Yeah. So I think these are all points of patience, you know, and care. You know, how much of time, how much of narratives we make, how many journeys we make to that city. You know, I have seen. You know, the case of town hall was like within a building, but the Varanasi case was like the whole of the city was like hundreds of buildings and the river and the ghats. So the whole scape was like a museum. It was so we picked up experiences that, and I think I had made about 100 trips in the last 5 years to that city. And just imagine, Katie, I with my friends from the US, you know, so I had friends from India, I had friends from US, so I could hear the stories of all of them. So that was really, I mean, I did not explain much to them. I think they explained much to me, you know. So I learned from them about their experiences, and that matured my understanding about the immersion into that city. Yeah, that immersion. Thank you.
I also wanted to ask quickly, and I know there are a lot of questions coming from the audience, as well as Stephen and Mai have questions coming up. So, and trying to be heedful of the time. But I cannot stop myself from asking this is, then are you thinking, and when I listen to both of you, the real and virtual, are they exclusive? Are they intermeshed? What is this relationship? And especially in terms of cultural memory and imagination, how do these interact?
I guess I'll start. I mean, when you talk about the real and the virtual, and if they interact, my first thought is the virtuality continuum. That was something invented by Milgram. I can't remember his first name right now, Paul Milgram. But anyway, it's the idea that the virtual is a continuum where it's reality is on one side and virtuality is on the other side. But because it's a continuum, that means that in between, there's this overlap between it. And as much as I've talking about the virtual reality experience, which is very much on one end of the continuum, the in-between part is really where a lot of really engaging elements can come. It's just augmented reality can actually be a little bit more difficult sometimes to create because you have to figure out how they interact. And those interactions, it helps link it. So it's like, you know, we're not trying to get to a world where we all wear virtual reality headsets and only ever interact with people virtually. We want to be more in this middle where we have our reality and it's supplemented by additional information. And when we look at it on the technology side, instead of like the more spiritual side, we can see it as like there's new technologies coming out constantly about like different augmented reality headsets and things that will help bridge this and help make it so then our storytelling tools will end up being how these work within our reality, supplementing what we see, what we do, and adding to that story, kind of layering on top. If we think about it like in like Photoshop, it's like like having additional layers within your Photoshop file. Or if I go analog, like if you're cutting out pieces of paper and creating a collage, you're just stacking more and more on top, and it can create these really dense and interesting, engaging understanding of stuff, that you're just giving more and more context and information and having it. So instead of two separate stories, maybe we have one story that's lush and full. So.
Dr. Sen?
Yeah, I think Katie has explained it all in a very beautiful way. I'll just add a few points here. I think the role of memory, the generic level, is very important. And then cultural memory is a very special version of memory, a special package of memory where you inherit or you get connected with stories and narratives and folks and ethos over generations, across races, between nations, across continents, at different levels. But in my mind, the little experience that I have, the cultural memory is not the end of things. It's like the beginning of things. As Katie said, it's like a transition between between this side of the experience to the other side of the experience. But the whole objective is to use cultural memory to cross the staircase, to climb the staircase, but transcend cultural memory and get into a larger universal space, which could be a transcultural memory, which is not a specific cultural memory. You get the more generic vocabularies and the syntaxes and the semantics of a generic cultural memory of human civilization as a whole. Then you understand that the same way the people of the Mayans and the Incas had behaved. I think the same things happened in Sumeria or in India or in Japan hundreds of years back. And there are some things which will happen again later in another planet in a different way. So what happens, you move from the specific to the more generic, you move from the more more defined to the more universal. I think that's the whole purpose of the journey about what is immersion. Because immersion, at the end of the day, what is immersion? At the end of the day, immersion makes you a slightly better human being. So, I mean, the whole purpose of our education, of all technology, is to make the human being slightly better. I mean, better in terms of understanding, better in terms of his mind map, the mental map, his power of assimilation, his matrix of the minds to get everything together, so that his limited cultural memory expands to an unlimited reservoir of a larger cultural memory. That's the whole purpose. You become a larger citizen. You're able to see the same thing in New York that I see in Calcutta. That I see in Calcutta. I mean, I see those. I mean, if I start seeing those, then I'm really working on cultural memories. I can see how a cultural city of the United States of America is behaving almost the same way like a cultural city of India, which is Kolkata. I see the same people, the same aspiration. Maybe the syntaxes are different, but the semantics are quite close, but the semiotics are the same. So at the level of semiotics, they're almost the same. But the syntax are different. Maybe they speak in English, they're speaking in Bengali. Maybe they're using one kind of technology here, they're using something else. So that's how you make language. You have A, B, C. You use all those words. But when you form those words and you make those sentences, when you make the language and you reach the pattern, that's exactly what Christopher Alexander was explaining by his pattern language technique. Like you move from the vowels and the consonants to the words, and from the words you build a language. And when you build language narratives, you reach the patterns. And when you can reach patterns, then you can see the universal backbone of design. That's immersion. That's why I was talking about Christopher Alexander. He's one great architect who gave us an approach how to immerse ourselves. He also talked about hierarchies, ladders, and the two-way journey. Smaller patterns are collapsing into larger patterns. Larger patterns are decomposing into smaller patterns. So he talks about a staircase. That way, the Jacob's ladder, the two-way ladders. The human being is trying to climb up, and the angels are coming down. So what are those? The human beings are smaller patterns who are trying to become larger patterns. The angels are larger patterns who are trying to become smaller patterns. So at some point we cross each other, and the cultural memory is used. The moment that happens, we become universal. So that's exactly Christopher Alexander's pattern memory. Because I did my PhD on Christopher Alexander using his language. So I really had to read almost all his books and know everything about him. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Very interesting. I would now say, because it's almost 11 o'clock here,
Yeah.
I would ask Stephen and Mai to pull up the questions, and if they can ask our speakers those. And in the meantime, I will also take up questions from the audience as we go. Stephen, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for Katie Graham, we have a question. So the first question that we came up with, it was, can you define virtual reality? Do you believe that the experience of virtual reality allows us to understand the same level of detail that we perceive in real life? If so, how? And if not, explain.
So, I mean, there's multiple ways of defining virtual reality. If we look from the point of view of it as a technology, then it's all about using technology in order to reproduce a world that provides this level of presence for the person, that this feeling of believing that they are in this virtual environment. And I'm going to take this stance on it. Even though I know that there's others, and I do agree with other definitions of the virtual in a wider sense. But when we look at it from the technology point of view, it's about using the technologies to help transport someone, so then they kind of have this disbelief. They let go of their disbelief that, they're in this virtual world. They believe it. And you can see that that works, that there's that sense of presence, because anytime someone puts on a headset, they know they're still in their living room. But if you're playing a game, you still all of a sudden duck because you're afraid you're going to get hit in the head by a virtual wall or something flying at you. And then when you're talking about this level of detail, I mean, the fact is, it is a replica. It's not the real. So you'll never get the same exact thing, because when it's not engaging all of your senses, like maybe later on, we'll all of a sudden touch and smell, but here it's not. So it is a filtered version of what it's replicating, but that doesn't make it less believable. And when we actually think about virtual reality experiences, the ones that are the most realistic, like, and this isn't even just for virtual reality, this is for all technology, for video games and for movies, the ones that have really tried to get to that realism sometimes actually fail because they're just so close. And but drop it, it's called the uncanny valley, that the more realistic at one point you believe it might be real, but then something happens, and it could be like the way that arms move, like a little bit of the arm muscles is slightly wrong, or what else, just other, like the knees don't bend right when they walk, and it's things that you just can't get your head around. An example is the movie Polar Express. It was criticized quite a bit because it reached that. It was too close to real, but not. And then because of that, we actually have to think, maybe you don't want super realism. Maybe you're not trying to replicate, because when you replicate, then you have that fakeness that happens. And then therefore, when you look at things like Minecraft, like no one's really believing Minecraft is real, but because it has its own laws and it's not trying to replicate ours, it's creating this new. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the right question. I might have changed it. But the point is, the virtual reality shouldn't be trying to create a replica. It shouldn't be that. It should be creating its own reality that has its own sets of rules and laws, and it can tell the story and inform you of what's happening, but it should never replace the real. It should always just supplement it.
I think that was beautiful, Katie, how you put it. This idea of not replacing a real, but adding to it, I guess, it's beautiful. Thank you. Mai?
Yes. And our next question is that how does it affect the future of museums, historic sites, and similar institutions?
Is this question for me again? Sorry.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
it's for you.
Okay, so how does it affect museums and all that? I think there's always a fear that as soon as we have these virtual ways of visiting places, we're not going to want to visit the real places anymore. But I have to say, when I see pictures from a few years ago of going to a beach, or if I see a really great experience, like a virtual reality experience of a building, or hear music being played from a specific concert, I don't go, oh great, I can stay on my couch and just experience it here in my slippers and PJs. I'm like, no, I want to go there. So I actually feel that although people are afraid that it's going to stop tourism when we have all of these things, it will actually have the opposite effect, that it will make people want to experience them for real. And it's that supplemental idea. Nothing's replacing it. It's adding to it and making you want to. And of course, right now, it is replacing a lot of this, that we can't actually access it, but it's making us feel like we're still connected to these physical places and lessons and stories, and we'll want to learn more later. And I know for myself, we have a much longer list of places we want to visit now due to all of the virtual tours of different museums and experiences that we've done. So that's how I think it'll work with it.
And I think what you said earlier about the virtual not being real then really resounds in this opinion of yours as well. And definitely my go-to places list has increased as well. Mai, go ahead.
Yes, and then we do have a last question that we prepared for you. So VR is presented in a creative formatting, including game engine series that bring a sense of fun and enjoyment to the visitor. So we have seen its potential in COVID times. What is the next potential development created for a higher VR experience for the users?
I always love these questions of like, what's next? Because the fact is we don't actually know. And that's the fun of it, that we're trying to figure it out as we go. And if I think back to like 2015, New York Times created a virtual reality app where they're like to learn about the news that way. And when it came out, the I think the CEO of New York Times said something like we've been telling stories in the exact same way for like 100 years, and now we're about to do it differently. Like he said it a lot more elegantly. I just wish I had the exact quote in front of me, but he was starting to talk about how they're like, we're about to start telling stories differently. And then as Oculus was starting to be more apparent too, there was also this conversation about like, yeah, like, you know, we have this great tool, but we just don't quite know how to make the language. And when we look at what's happening now, there is this, we're making stories, we're figuring it out, we're using the tools to our advantage, the specific medium specifics. But what's next? It's hard to know, but it's going to be exciting, and we're going to try to figure it out. And I don't know, I think the more people who have it, the better. And that's just it. Every time I ask in a room, how many of you have tried virtual reality? Every single year, more and more hands go up. And that's the exciting thing, that's becoming something that's going to be just as common, but then also not as common, because it'll be totally different and we have no idea what's coming.
Thank you. There is a question here from our audience, from Priyanka Kuril, and she asks, well, she says, it was surreal listening to all these ideas and creating immersive experiences through a city. Can these experiences, including meditation, touching people's subconscious mind, be channelized in a way to create behavioral changes that can make people more internally aware of things like environment, such as protecting our rivers, which often get polluted, and create a model of societal change? So more a tool for change rather than documentation. It's a great question. I don't know who would want to take a shot at that. Dr.
Katie,
Sen?
you want to say something? I can say later, or I can take this. It's up to you.
I'll just say one thing, because I think this question is much more geared towards what you were talking about, but it kind of makes me think, when we think about you know, making you more aware, but really more empathetic, like and feeling that maybe you should care about the problems. There's someone that Noni Denapina, she's a journalist that started using immersive journalism. So she's one of the people who really first started using virtual reality in other ways than just games and research. And so she created these like virtual reality experiences of like news events where and the people who were like who experienced it, who would put the headsets on, like one of the experiences, you were in a line for a food bank, and then one of the people collapses on the ground, and because they're diabetic and they're going like, and they didn't have any insulin, so they're going into shock. And this is a real event that happened, but it's models, like computer models, and really poor computer models too. But then it has the audio from the actual event where you hear people being upset, and the people who experienced this like were crying like from it, that they wanted to do something and they cared so much. But if you saw on the news, like man collapses in line at food bank, we kind of just push it aside. So I think that by immersing ourselves in the different ways to immerse, by showing these in new ways, it's making us more empathetic to what's going on and will make us care more. So.
Dr. Sen?
Yeah, I think Katie has almost answered it all. I think the key word here is empathetic, So we move from a world of apathy, where we have the technology, but we don't have the feeling for it, to a second world, which is a world of sympathy. We sympathize, but we still think that we know more, we are better, we have larger things to offer. But when we empathize, we have that equivalence. That's why I wrote that word, war and equivalence. So to move from apathy to sympathy is war. But when we move from sympathy to empathy, we get into equivalence. And after you have equivalence, you have peace. And once you have peace, the mind settles, you have the presence of mind, These are the words of Wordsworth, the mind is present, mindfulness. You can see your mind. Half of the mind is not in London, and 1/4 of the mind is not in Paris, and 1/3 of the mind is in IIT Kharagpur. It's not that way. The entire mind is mindful. It's within your control. So what happens when the mind settles? When the mind settles, you become empathetic. You see things in perfect equivalence. Then you can see that in the cycles of the river, which is flowing outside, and there are high tides and low tides, and the river has, sort of in the monsoon, it shoots up to a certain level of the ghat, and in the winter, it goes down and recedes to a low level of the ghat. It reminds you of the other cycles of life. These are not primitive cycles. These are not cycles which had existed 6,000 years back in primitive agrarian societies, but these are eternal cycles. This is exactly what Gregory Bateson, and Al Gore talks about in their book, The Inconvenient Truth. So then you realize that the cycles, the life cycles, the movement cycles, the patterns that is happening outside is also happening inside. So in meditation, I'll end with this. What happens is that your mind settles, your mind becomes calm. Now, whether you do it through an oriental method of meditation, or you do it through a virtual method of machine meditation, that's not the final question. The final question is to make people reach that level of mindfulness, so that the mind becomes calm. And the moment it becomes calm, all the good things inside you, that kingdom of God, that kingdom of divinity. And what is divinity? Divinity is not about magic or anything. Divinity is all about good feelings, good understanding, good empathy, good ways of understanding each other. They all come out because the mind has settled and the mind becomes a mirror. So all the internal faculties of what is within becomes the external faculties of what is without. So the same human being who was not able to understand the reality outside, who was putting something on the river and was polluting the river, the same human being won't be able to do that anymore. He becomes more responsible. And he won't be able to do that not only in a river in India, but also in a river in Palestine, because he won't have that difference between an Indian river and a Palestinian river. He'll just see rivers, rivers of life, rivers of life. So meditation Oriental method or Western immersive reality, augmented reality, whatever method you use, the final thing is to evolve, to bring out a good human being, which is already inside you, but somehow it's suppressed. Now that's what that movie Avatar shows. Who is that Avatar? He's not a special being, he's nothing great, but he just brings that entire thing to a different level of consciousness. He raises the insecurity and the lack of safety of those people in that planet to a higher level of consciousness, one. Two, he connects those people with the earth people and brings them to a level of equivalence. In other words, three, he brings them to a collective level of consciousness and empathy. If meditation does that, then meditation is most welcome. If meditation does not do that or guarantee that, then meditation is not welcome. If VR does that, then VR is welcome. If VR does not do that, then VR is not welcome. So technology or culture is not the final thing in human change. We have to see whether these are the changes that changes human beings and make them slightly better. That is the whole purpose. These are the words of Amos Rappaport, a great architect from Michigan. He said, one changes rather than changing the environment. And when you change, you can design a better environment. And then the better environment makes you a further better human being. And then you change the environment even better. So there is a backward and forward linkage between human beings and the environment. And then the whole planet becomes green. So this backward and forward linkage is the whole foundation of green consciousness, green policies and green field development, whatever you call it. So that is the whole purpose. That is the whole end. The final objective of what we are supposed to do. Thank you.
That is great. I just wanted to read a comment from our audience, Judy Seal. She says, these technologies provide the possibility of intense ethnographical experiences for everyone, not only the academic or specialist community. And what a gift to everyone. Thank you, Judy. I think we'll take... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just take up a small portion of that, and Katie can give the longer answer. I think if you go to the Smithsonian Foundation augmented reality, if you look at the National Geographic portals, they're all very rich ethnographic, cultural mappings, ethnographic mappings, epigraphic mappings of lost cultures. That's what National Geographic does. But about 30 years back, that used to come in the form of a magazine. Now you have VR portals and a lot of things where you can actually go and experience a Mayan temple or an Egyptian pyramid and live a day with Cleopatra, or maybe with Pythagoras in Athens, or maybe with Buddha in Varanasi. That's beautiful, If you can guarantee that, what can be better than any? You have goose pimples and you're excited to spend a day with Buddha in Varanasi, or with Socrates in Athens, or with maybe Martin Luther in Atlanta. So these are deep ethnographic experiences which I think portals can assure. I think that can be a great beginning. I'm sure Katie has better answers.
I can add, I'll just actually give a little anecdote. When I was a kid, we used to always go to this national park in Alberta called Writing on Stone National Park. I have a lot of fond memories there. And one thing we would camp there, but they had lots of carvings on the stones there that were from a long time ago. But now there's actually a virtual reality experience that adds to that. And it's one of these things that this place that I remember so fondly as a kid, now people can experience it online, but it's also now you get the narrator, you understand what the symbols mean more. And so it's not just being able to experience them, but being able to experience them again. And I think that's something, it is a gift. It's really fun to be a part of the development of all of this.
Absolutely. And more so now with the COVID times, we also, that has been recognized much more. Probably we have time for one more question, although we have a lot of questions for both of you, but Stephen, if you want to ask the next question to Dr. Sen, and probably we'll wrap up. It's been 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We are
sure.
immersed. We are immersed.
We are immersed, definitely.
Yeah.
Our first question for Joy-san is, in many parts of the world, several cultures reside together. Do you believe that culture is a necessary factor to consider when perceiving spaces, and if so, why?
Okay, I think Katie and we answered it in some way or the other. Yeah, but I think I'll take up on that once more, and I think I get a chance to speak for the last time in this session. So I'll go back to Norbert Wiener of MIT. When he explains cybernetics, what exactly is cybernetics? He combines 3 domains of knowledge. So one is a living philosophy. So he talks about a good living philosophy. The second thing he talks about is mathematics. And what he means by mathematics, he talks about, it's like paddling a boat, So how many strokes you make, on your oar, So your boat is moving, and so it's like the frequency of paddling or how many times the wheel is moving, It's like a simple scientific word, frequency. So that's mathematics. And he talked about the third word, which is aerodynamics. I mean, fine, you're moving, but you're moving towards where? What kind of aerodynamics? Are you going from point A to point B just for the sake of going to point B? Or you're going from B to C for the sake of going from A to C? So what is B with respect to A, and what is C with respect to B? And are you making a semantics from A to C? So when you combine the 3 things together, this is exactly what the ancient Greeks were doing, because cybernetics is an ancient Greek word which was used by Pythagoras and Anaximander, about 2,500 years back, But that time they didn't have computers and large data analytics. So they had a philosophical exploration. So in India, the cybernetics actually means guru and the guide. So the guide actually is like the oarsman. It's like the Noah. He's like the Noah of the ark. So he's giving you a direction, and he's giving you a direction which is aerodynamics, and he's giving you the right number of paddles. So you're always not immersed. I mean, if I'm meditating once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once in the evening, once in the night, I may not be able to take so much of meditation, because my body laboratory is not equipped. So I must have the right amount of either augmented reality of Katie or meditation from Joyson. I cannot have an overdose of things. There's always a right balance. So there's a question of a right balance, a right frequency, a right guidance, and a right direction. That's cybernetics. So this right combinations of how many times will you say a cultural narrative, which is mathematics? How many morals of the story will you say as the goal, and in what direction will you make them move, is actually culture. That's good culture. If you're doing overdose, then it will be a cultural shock. If you're doing an underdose, then culture will recede and vanish. It won't remain. I think by answering the question, I think every culture in the world has its right space and time specific cultural, what do you call, cauldron. I cannot just take India out of Varanasi and put it in, say, Pennsylvania. I mean, Philadelphia. I cannot do that. Philadelphia has a similar thing like Varanasi, all the rivers and those kind. But Philadelphia is Philadelphia. It's a brotherhood of nation, brotherhood of it's a city which celebrates the brotherhood of people, and Varanasi also celebrates brotherhood in a different kind. So Varanasi is Varanasi, Philadelphia is Philadelphia. They are comparable, but you cannot transpose them. So each place has its own cultural memory. So if I bring in a culture from Varanasi to Philadelphia, it will take some time for the Philadelphian people to change that as per the space, time, context, causation of Philadelphia. And the same thing will happen. That's what happened to Beatles. When they went to India, they formed an Indian music. And when Indian musicians like Ravi Shankar came to the US, he did a American version of Indian music, not the Indian version of Indian music. So these are like cultural acculturations and enculturations of different capsules. So there are concordances and there are discordances. They are not discordances, they're actually celebrations of diversity and heterogeneity. That's very, very important in cultural memory. We cannot have a homogeneous culture across the world. It has to be multiplicity, heterogeneous, and different aspirations. But the final goal is to make a good human being, whether you're doing it in Philadelphia or you're doing it in Varanasi. That's a final goal. That's what cybernetics does. But you need different approaches. I mean, the roof is the same, but you should have different staircases for different groups of people. The roof is the same, but you may have different staircases and different balconies before you reach that one common roof. That's very, very important. That's a very interesting architectural parable which Christopher Alexander has used in his book. So I'm just quoting him, and with that I end. Thank you.
Katie, would you like to add anything?
I think that was the perfect ending.
But thank you both. I think it has been a very nice conversation and lots of things that probably I have my notes and more reading lists. I think it has opened up a lot of domains. So I just want to thank you both, Katie and Dr. Sen, also Stephen and Mai, and other members of the organizing team who are not there today, but Sandrine Dumas, Anel Turango, Leah Simpson, who was there earlier with us, and Catherine De Silva, who were very much involved in the organization of the event. And thank you to our audience. And there will be a recording of this event available later for later watching and viewing. It can be found on our YouTube page as well as on the website mindfulhabitats.ca. So yes, on that note, and we also have another webinar coming tomorrow morning. So if you all want to join there, please do so. But we are talking about similar topics with, as you said, Katie, with multiple perspectives on this idea of culture. And we as designers or interveners in some form or the other, what do we understand of culture in that? It's a big domain, but we're trying to tackle it from different perspectives. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Katie, it was a pleasure to have you again and again. It was really learning a lot from you. Thank you so much. I'm always a student, still a student. Thank you.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much. I agree completely. It was great being part of this conversation.
Thanks to Pallavi, Stephen, Mai, and to others. Kathleen, she was chatting quite often. Thanks, Kathleen.
Okay, everyone have a good
bye.
rest of your day or good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.